"Hey, Grandpa, think you can handle something heavier than a broom?" The voice, sharp and laced with the casual arrogance of youth, cut through the dry afternoon air. It belonged to a young Marine sergeant, his physique a testament to relentless training, his jaw set with the easy confidence of someone who had never known true defeat. He and his squad of scout snipers, clad in advanced camouflage and bristling with high-tech gear, treated the dusty firing range like their personal kingdom. Kenneth Harding, 82 years old, did not turn around. He continued his work, the rhythmic scrape of his push broom gathering a small pile of gleaming brass shell casings. His movements were slow, deliberate, each one possessing an economy of motion that spoke not of weakness but of a deep ingrained patience. He was a small man, stooped by age, with hands gnarled by time and a face etched with the fine lines of a long, hard life. To the young Marines, he was just part of the landscape, a piece of range furniture as inanimate as the target stands or the ammunition cans. The sergeant, whose name tag read Thorne, exchanged a smirk with his men. "What's the matter, old-timer? Cat got your tongue?" Another Marine, younger still, chimed in. "Careful not to sweep away your pension, Pop." A ripple of condescending laughter followed. Kenneth paused his sweeping not to acknowledge them, but to carefully work a stubborn casing out from under the leg of a shooting bench. He moved with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate the young warriors. Their world was one of noise, of explosive action and shouted commands. His silence was a language they didn't understand, and they interpreted it as a challenge. Sergeant Thorne stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was used to being the center of attention, the alpha in any pack. The old man's complete lack of reaction was an affront. "I'm talking to you, old man. This is a live fire range. You need to pay attention." Kenneth straightened up slowly, his back protesting with a faint groan. He turned to face them for the first time. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were calm and clear. They held no fear, no anger, not even annoyance. They were simply observant, taking in the scene with a placid detachment that further unsettled the sergeant. "I'm paying attention," Kenneth said. His voice was raspy, a dry whisper of sound that was almost lost to the wind. The simplicity of the response, devoid of the deference Thorne expected, pushed him further. He needed to reassert his dominance. This old man, this janitor, was a perfect foil. He would be the butt of a joke that his men would tell for weeks. Thorne gestured grandly to his own rifle, a masterpiece of modern warfare resting on a bipod. It was an M40A6, equipped with a Schmidt and Bender scope that cost more than a used car. "See this? This is a real tool. Not like that broom you're holding. Takes a steady hand, a sharp eye." He pointed downrange, to the furthest target, a small steel silhouette shimmering in the heat 1,000 yards away. It was a shot that challenged even his most skilled snipers, a test of skill, technology, and instinct. "Tell you what, Grandpa, we're about to take a cold bore shot. First shot of the day. The hardest one to make. You look like you've been around. Ever see a man hit a target that far out?" Kenneth's gaze drifted past the sergeant, his eyes settling on the distant target. He didn't squint, his focus was absolute. "A few times," he said softly. The answer was so understated it was almost insolent. Thorne's patience snapped. The joke was no longer enough. He needed to humiliate the old man. "All right, that's it," Thorne declared, his voice booming across the firing line. Other Marines engaged in their own training began to turn their heads, their interest piqued by the confrontation. "You're a real wise guy, you know that? How about you show us how it's done?" He unslung his rifle and held it out. "Go on, take a shot. Let's see what an old-timer can do. We'll even spot for you." His men erupted in laughter. The idea was preposterous. This frail old man, who looked as if a stiff breeze might knock him over, trying to handle a high-caliber sniper rifle. It was theater of the absurd. The gathering crowd grew, a mix of amusement and unease spreading through the onlookers. A young range officer, a gunnery sergeant, started to walk over, a look of concern on his face. He felt he should intervene, that this hazing was getting out of hand. But Thorne was a decorated sniper, a rising star in the community. The gunny hesitated, not wanting to cause a scene over what was probably a harmless prank. Kenneth Harding looked at the offered rifle. He didn't seem to see the advanced composite stock or the massive, powerful scope. His eyes were fixed on something else, a simple, almost overlooked detail. The rifle had a plain, well-worn leather sling attached to it. It was a personal affectation of Thorne's, a nod to an older, more traditional time. As Kenneth's gaze fell upon that strip of leather, the present seemed to melt away. The air, thick with the smell of cordite and dry dust, was suddenly replaced by the scent of gun oil and jungle rot, the cloying sweetness of decay under a triple canopy forest. The hard-packed dirt of the range softened into thick, sucking mud. He could feel the familiar weight of a rifle, not this new, perfectly balanced machine, but an older, heavier wooden stock. A similar leather sling, damp with monsoon rain and his own sweat, was digging into his shoulder. The memory was not a picture, but a feeling, a ghost of sensation. He heard a voice, young and strained, whispering in his ear over the buzz of insects. "Did you get him, Ken? Did you get him?" The echo of a single muffled shot faded into the oppressive humidity of a long-forgotten war. The vision lasted no more than a second. When Kenneth's eyes refocused, they were back on the North Carolina firing range. A flicker of something ancient and hard, something dangerous, passed through his gaze before being extinguished. He looked up from the rifle and met Sergeant Thorne's mocking eyes, and he gave a single slow nod. He would take the shot, high above the unfolding drama. In a small observation tower that overlooked the entire Stone Bay range, Master Gunnery Sergeant Elias Vance lowered his binoculars. He was a lifer, a man whose skin had been weathered by deployments in every dusty corner of the world. He'd been watching Thorne's platoon all morning, evaluating their discipline, which he found somewhat lacking. He'd seen them start to haze the old range hand and had been about to key his radio to tell the range officer to break it up. But then he saw the old man turn. He saw him walk towards the firing line, and Master Guns Vance felt a cold knot form in the pit of his stomach. It wasn't just the old man's age that gave him pause. It was his posture. The way he walked. There was no wasted movement. His feet landed with a quiet certainty on the ground. His shoulders, though stooped, were balanced. It was the walk of a man who had spent a lifetime moving without being seen or heard. It was the walk of a hunter. Vance raised his binoculars again, zooming in on the old man's face. The lines, the set of his jaw, the pale, steady eyes. A name surfaced from the deep archives of his memory. A name he'd read once in a classified briefing. A name spoken only in hushed, reverent tones by the old-timers when they thought no one else was listening. It couldn't be. That man had vanished 50 years ago. A ghost, a myth, but Vance's gut, an organ he had learned to trust more than any intelligence report, screamed at him that he was wrong. He watched as the old man took his place behind the rifle, as Thorne and his men snickered, their phones out to record the coming foolishness. He saw the quiet confidence with which Kenneth Harding settled himself into position. This was not a joke. This was a desecration. Vance fumbled for his cell phone, his fingers thick and clumsy with sudden urgency. He didn't call the base commander. He didn't call the military police. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he hadn't used in years. A direct line to a specific, unassuming office at the Marine Corps Warfighting Laboratory in Quantico. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Doctrine and Standards. This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance at Stone Bay," he said, his voice low and tight. "I need you to run a name for me. Priority 1, active the Red Ledger Protocol." There was a pause on the other end. The Red Ledger was a code for living legends, for historical figures whose files were sealed for reasons of national security and institutional reverence. "Who's the name, Master Guns?" "Harding," Vance said, his eyes still glued to the scene below. "Kenneth M. Harding." He could hear the frantic clacking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. Check the restricted annex. The files marked Carlos's ghost. The typing stopped. A sharp intake of breath. "My God, are you sure?" "I'm looking right at him," Vance said. "And Sergeant Thorne's scout sniper platoon is about to make the biggest mistake of their collective careers. You need to get someone down here. Now." In a sterile, quiet office in Quantico, Virginia, a colonel with silver hair and the weary eyes of a man who carried too many secrets slammed his phone down into its cradle. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. "Captain," he barked at a young officer sitting at a nearby desk, "get me the base commander at Camp Lejeune, General Morrison, on my desk phone now. Tell his aide it's a Broken Arrow priority." The captain, wide-eyed at the use of a code meant for the most dire emergencies, fumbled with his phone. "Sir, what's going on?" The colonel paced the length of his office, his hands clasped behind his back. "Master Guns Vance just called from the Stone Bay range. He says Kenneth Harding is on the firing line." The captain's face remained blank. The name meant nothing to him. The colonel stopped pacing and fixed the young officer with an impatient glare. "Of course you don't know the name. You're too young. Your generation reads reports, we heard the stories. Kenneth Harding isn't just some veteran, son. He was a phantom in Vietnam. They called him the ghost of the Ashau Valley." He walked to his window, looking out but seeing a jungle 50 years in the past. He started as a standard line sniper with the 1st Marines. His record was so extraordinary, so unbelievable, he was sheep-dipped and recruited into MAC-V SO-G. A black unit. He worked alone or with a single spotter deep in enemy territory for weeks at a time. He was a protege of the great Carlos Hathcock himself. Hathcock taught him the art, but Harding turned it into a religion. The colonel turned back to the captain, his voice dropping. His official confirmed kill count is sealed at the highest level. The unofficial numbers are the stuff of nightmares and legends. After his third tour, he just vanished, took a quiet retirement, refused every medal ceremony, and disappeared off the face of the earth. We all thought he was dead. And now Master Guns Vance is telling me that some arrogant snot-nosed sergeant is treating him like a circus animal for the entertainment of his squad. The phone on the desk buzzed. The colonel snatched it up. General Morrison. Yes, sir, it's me. I don't have time to explain. You need to get to the Stone Bay sniper range immediately. I mean right now. Take your sergeant major with you. Sir, with all due respect, just go. I'm spinning up a Huey on this end. I'll be there in under an hour. He hung up the phone and grabbed his cover from its stand. Captain, you have the watch. Pray for those young Marines, because I'm fresh out of mercy. Back on the range, the universe had narrowed to the space between Kenneth Harding and the 1,000-yard target. The growing crowd, the nervous energy, the mocking faces of Sergeant Thorne's men. None of it registered. He was in the bubble, that sacred space of silence and focus that only true marksmen know. Thorne, oblivious to the storm of activity he had set in motion, sauntered over and clapped Kenneth hard on the shoulder. All right, old-timer, let's see what you've got. Don't hurt yourself. That scope might have a little kick. With a subtle, practiced movement, Thorne reached down and made a 2-click adjustment to the scope's windage knob. It was a small act of sabotage, enough to send the round several feet wide of the target at that range, ensuring the old man's failure and cementing his own superiority. He winked at his friends, who were struggling to stifle their laughter. Just point it down range and pull the trigger, Thorne said with a magnanimous grin. Maybe you'll get lucky and hit the dirt. Kenneth didn't respond. He ignored the sabotage scope. He didn't put his eye to the rubber cup. Instead, he closed his eyes. He wasn't looking through the scope. He was feeling the world. He felt the slight tremor in the ground, the gentle but steady push of the wind from left to right. He could feel the humidity in the air, the angle of the sun. He processed the data with an organic computer that had been calibrated in the jungles and mountains of a foreign land. His breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible. His finger curled around the trigger. It was in that moment of absolute stillness that the first sound broke the spell. A low, rhythmic thumping, a sound that grew rapidly in volume. It wasn't a car engine. It was the distinctive, powerful chop of a UH-1Y Huey helicopter flying low and fast, heads turned towards the sky. At the same time, from the main access road came the squeal of tires on asphalt. A convoy of black government SUVs and white military police trucks, lights flashing but sirens silent, roared into the parking lot. They skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust. Doors flew open with military precision. The base commander, a full-bird colonel with a chest full of ribbons, jumped out of the lead vehicle, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was followed by the base sergeant major, a man who looked like he had been carved from granite. The Huey flared for a landing in an adjacent field, its rotor wash kicking up a storm of grass and dirt. Before the skids even fully settled, the side door was thrown open and the colonel from Quantico leaped out, followed by his captain. They moved with a purpose that radiated absolute authority, marching directly towards the firing line. The entire range fell silent. The snickering died in the throats of Thorne's men. Training ceased. Everyone stood and stared at the sudden overwhelming display of brass. Thorne, his face draining of all color, tried to call his men to attention, but the base commander silenced him with a single murderous glare. But they were all too late. Before the first officer could shout a command, a single sharp crack echoed across the range. The sound of the M40A6 firing, every eye on the range, from the lowest private to the highest-ranking colonel, snapped from the old man to the distant 1,000-yard target. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the ringing in their ears. Then, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound traveled back across the vast expanse. A clear, high-pitched ping. The unmistakable sound of a copper-jacketed lead bullet striking hardened steel. On the high-definition monitor connected to a spotter's scope, the image was undeniable. A single perfect hole had appeared directly in the center of the target's head. A cold bore shot from a rifle whose scope had been deliberately misaligned, made by an 82-year-old man who swept the floors for a living. Kenneth Harding slowly pushed himself up from the ground, his old bones creaking in protest. He did not look at the target. He already knew the result. The colonel from Quantico marched forward, his boots stopping a few feet from Kenneth. He ignored the stunned and terrified Sergeant Thorne. His eyes were only for the old man. Drawing himself to his full ramrod-straight height, He brought his hand up in the sharpest, most impeccably correct salute Thorne had ever witnessed. It was not a salute of regulation. It was a salute of profound, soul-deep reverence. "Mr. Harding." The colonel's voice was thick with emotion, but it carried across the silent range. "It is an honor, sir." The base commander, General Morrison, and his sergeant major immediately followed suit, their hands snapping to their covers. Every other officer on the range, understanding their cue, did the same. The confused and awestruck enlisted Marines, sensing the seismic shift in the atmosphere, also raised their hands in salute. The entire assembly stood at attention, a silent, uniformed honor guard for the old man in the faded work clothes. Holding his salute, the Quantico colonel turned his head slightly to address the dumbfounded Marines. His voice boomed with an authority that tolerated no dissent. "For those of you who do not know who this man is, allow me to educate you. This is Gunnery Sergeant Kenneth Harding, retired. In the Republic of Vietnam, he served 3 tours of duty, first with the 1st Marine Division's STA platoon, before being recruited into the Studies and Observations Group. His marksmanship is credited with saving the lives of over 200 Marines and soldiers in contested territory. At the siege of Khe Sanh, after his spotter was killed, he single-handedly held off an entire NVA battalion for 72 hours until reinforcements could arrive. He is a recipient of the Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts. He is not a veteran. He is a living legend of this corps, and you will all show him the respect that he has more than earned with his blood and his sacrifice." The colonel finally dropped his salute and turned his glacial gaze upon Sergeant Thorne. The temperature on the range seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Sergeant," he said, his voice now a low, dangerous whisper, "you and your entire platoon will report to my temporary office at 0600 tomorrow. You are going to be given a remedial course on the meaning of our core values: honor, courage, and commitment. You have dishonored your uniform, you have disgraced your billet as a sniper, and you have disrespected a man who has bled more for this corps than your entire platoon has sweat. You are a disgrace." Thorne stood there, pale and trembling, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces. He looked at Kenneth, his eyes filled not with mockery, but with a dawning, sickening horror and a shame so profound it felt like a physical blow. It was then that Kenneth Harding finally spoke again. He looked not at the fuming colonel but at the broken young sergeant. "It's all right, Colonel," he said, his raspy voice gentle. "He's just a boy, full of fire and vinegar. The corps needs that fire. He just needs to learn where to point it." He turned his calm blue eyes to Thorne. "The rifle's a good one, son. A bit too much glass on top for my taste. In my day we had to count the clicks and feel the wind. But you'll do fine with it. Just remember this: the man behind the rifle is always more important than the rifle itself. Respect your weapon, but respect the man next to you more. That's all that matters." Kenneth's gaze drifted down and he gently patted the worn leather sling on the rifle he had just fired. The simple action triggered one last clear memory. He was not old, but a young man caked in mud in a fighting hole. A fresh-faced private, a kid named Miller who was his spotter, was handing him his rifle. "Here, Gunny," the kid had said with a proud grin. "Got you a new sling. Traded my last pack of smokes for it. It's good leather. It won't let you down." Miller had been killed 2 days later, but the sling, a symbol of camaraderie, of a bond forged in the crucible of combat, had never failed. It was a lesson in respect, the very lesson Sergeant Thorne had so desperately needed to learn. The fallout from the incident at Stone Bay was swift and decisive. The story, stripped of classified details, became a piece of institutional lore overnight. The video taken on the Marines' phones was confiscated and repurposed, becoming the centerpiece of a new training module for all non-commissioned officers on professional ethics and the unwritten duty to honor the giants whose shoulders they stood upon. The colonel from Quantico made good on his word, mandating a new course on Marine Corps history, one that focused not on dates and battles, but on the personal stories of legends like Harding, Chesty Puller, and Carlos Hathcock. Sergeant Thorne and his platoon were not discharged. The Corps, in its wisdom, decided that redemption was more valuable than punishment. They were, however, publicly and formally reprimanded. Thorne was demoted to corporal. The entire platoon was reassigned from their elite duties and placed under the direct supervision of Master Gunnery Sergeant Vance for 1 month of what he called spiritual realignment. Their days were no longer spent practicing the art of the long-range kill. Instead, they were spent cleaning the base memorials, volunteering at the local VFW hall, and most importantly, sitting in silence while men with faded tattoos and distant eyes told them stories of what it truly meant to serve. A few weeks later, long after the colonels had returned to Quantico and the Fuhrer had died down, Kenneth Harding was back on the range. The early morning sun was just beginning to burn the mist off the ground. He was sweeping, the familiar rhythmic scrape of the broom a comforting sound in the quiet dawn. A single figure approached him, walking with a new, less arrogant stride. It was Rex Thorne. He was in his PT uniform, looking younger and far more vulnerable without the gear and the rank on his collar. He held 2 steaming styrofoam cups of coffee. He stopped a few feet from Kenneth, shifting his weight, clearly nervous. For a long moment he said nothing. He just held out one of the cups. "Mr. Harding, Gunny," he finally managed to say, his voice quiet and humbled. I just wanted to say thank you." Kenneth stopped his sweeping. He looked at the young Marine, at the genuine remorse in his eyes. He took the offered cup, his gnarled hand brushing against Thorne's. He took a slow sip, the warmth chasing away the morning chill. He nodded, a gesture of acceptance, of forgiveness. "I told you, son. You've got the fire. Just learn where to point it." They stood there together in the silence, the living legend and the humbled young warrior, drinking coffee as the sun climbed higher over the empty firing range. A new kind of respect had been forged, not in the deafening heat of battle but in the quiet, hopeful light of a new day. The legacy of heroes like Kenneth Harding reminds us that valor is not always loud. Sometimes it is found in quiet dignity and a lifetime of service. If you were inspired by this story, please like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more.